Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continued playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8.6. Okay, we're cruising along pretty well on this. As we can see here, the effects that these Danes are fighting out to the bitter end is the effect of not triggering the decision in a proper, timely manner to have the invasion happen. I think it's probably when Paris falls or something like that that it went away. They would have collapsed a lot more. So we are not entirely waiting for Denmark to collapse before we declare war on Norway. So we're sending up an invasion to start there, and we hopefully supplies will get here soonish. How are we doing for supply movement? Well, I should be there pretty soon to get supplies up there for that invasion, and we're getting very close to invading Yugoslavia. So we're going to be going in a north and south direction and selling more supplies to the Soviets. And yes, you can have energy Vichy. And we've won there. I also just did put up a bunch of bombers just before the episode started. I think that may have helped collapse. The resistance there to the crossing. Okay. Capital ship fire control systems. Most excellent. Okay, that's grayed out one. Of course, I'm going to leave the anti-aircraft. And also, looks like armored HQs have advanced. That is very nice, but we're going to stop that. Yes, it does reduce the time between attacks, which is incredibly important to me. But we're pushing ahead a little bit. I'm keeping this one going because it also gives us very good occupational HQs. We may end up using a lot of these HQs, and we're going to get some more here. But we may not. And so I don't need to push on that. So we didn't stop the command here. Good. Just make sure that we get other critical ones researched, as well as to try to some degree balance things out. Meaning like naval or air power research as well. Mentioning that, let's look here. Okay, we've got some better. Okay, let's come down here for flying boat. Let's get that done now. Study for armored level 2. Great. Panzer Army and a couple of Panzer Corps. Good. And 5th Panzer Division. Good. For some reason, I don't think we ever got the 7th Panzer Division given by events, and I think it's supposed to have happened. We're going to refit this. Hopefully it wasn't something sort of critical for my immediate invasion of Yugoslavia. I think we can overwhelm it with whatever, but now's the time to do it. But we're still waiting for some fuel and such to get down here in good numbers. And a winter invasion of Yugoslavia isn't the worst thing in the world. But it gets sort of bad for Norway, so that's why we're moving on it. I think that's a good enough in here. Deep enough in that I don't think we're going to have much Royal Navy problems. We might have a bit more once we try to invade up further, but okay. Ah yes, this was the Becker chain of events. We want to do this. Yes, SS rocket artillery. French workers. Okay, let's see. Germany gets French workers until September 41, so for basically a year. National manpower, leadership modifiers, good. I see efficiency, production, good. Now, give you a little bit about this. National Socialist Germany, Nazi Germany. And again, I know a lot of you are watching the full series, but others of you are dipping in and out of it, so you may have not gotten all this. A lot of people are educated with Marxist education, and I'm using my term there very clearly and correctly, in my opinion. I'm not saying communist education, I'm saying Marxist education. There is a difference. Marx had this synthesis, antithesis, whatever, sort of a, forget the exact model with the new paradigm shifts through the age of march of history, shall we say, a progressive idea of history, that humanity is progressing from, primitive caveman to superior being kind of thing, and history's a march of progress, not necessarily to be. Now, he was a progressive, which is a sort of a political ideology, but man is making progress through history is different than the progressivism of thought. But so I entirely disagree with Marx on that. I believe there's been I don't know, but I believe there's been 3 modern ages of mankind. We are in the 3rd one. The first one was down in here with Minoan culture, which included the Santorini, Thera, whatever you want to call the island, which may have been Atlantis, or part of the Atlantis myth. Not that they ever called themselves that. I don't know what they called themselves. I don't think we really sort of know. Minoan is a name given to them in the modern time. But because one of the reasons I say that this may have been a modern age of mankind is 2 basic things. And again, we'd have basically no written record. There are some, but no real written record. Their art, if you look at their art, which a lot of it has survived from on the walls of some of the buildings, especially on the Santorini island, is very naturalistic compared to a lot of the art that lingered until Cleopatra, which is, Greco art, but there was sort of the Egyptian profile stylized art. They could do art better, more realistic if they wanted to. It's just their style. So it's partially the style of art, and also the other thing is that I look at it is they had flush toilets. This is obviously in a pre-electrical age, so we can't have that, but they had flush toilets, and they had multi-story buildings, and that weren't just the palace. They've looked at the city on Thera that they're digging up slowly. I mean, they've been doing it for generations now, but going slowly at it. This is apparently common/average homes. They're not big, grand homes with lots of living space for servants. So I'm not, servants/slaves. I'm not saying they didn't have an underclass, but these weren't huge, grand places with just then they have the art and the flush toilets. Now, these are small, fairly compact housing that isn't going to hold huge numbers of people to support a huge number of people to support a family living there. Just a family, maybe again with some servants, but not a huge class divide to have the flush toilets. And this is not just the flush toilet, which is part of it, but a sewer system of a sort coming through a city. Okay, that is part of it. Now some of the research they've done, they're finding stuff in the Western Mediterranean, not that it's gone to the level of indoor plumbing, but building structures that had been misidentified or just overlooked, and they've even found them way out here on the Azores. So this may have been spread out of a first modern period of mankind. Again, may, because I don't have enough writings of it. The second modern period of mankind is definitely started by the Hellenistic period, and before that, but definitely by then, which Hellenism is Greek society after the death of Alexander the Great, which sort of spread to this part of the world, including the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt. Now, the Greek part was just mostly here at Alexandria, but it was, Greek Hellenism went all the way to the Bactrian Empire in modern-day Afghanistan. That, and obviously before that, you have Socrates, Plato, and then Aristotle. Aristotle was one of the teachers of Alexander the Great. So it's prior to this sort of cultural aspect, and part of that I'm looking at Socrates and his viewpoints of sort of modernism. So it predates Hellenism, but it's definitely sort of here by Hellenism, and definitely by Rome you have, which is a bit later, you have, again, indoor plumbing. So that's another one of my keys of a modern age of mankind. And then there was a Dark Age period, sort of the Mycenaean Greek period after the First Age. Then, of course, you have the Dark Ages and the fall of Rome and all of that stuff. And then, of course, now starting in the Renaissance, not there yet, but starting in the Renaissance, moving into the Age of Enlightenment as sort of the early modern period, and then finally now we're in the third modern period of mankind. And so I don't see a progression that Marx saw. I see a cycle. I see history different, but also, which is very key, is Marx, with religion. I don't know, did he say it, opiate of the masses, or exactly who? But may have been Engels, or I forget exactly. But Marx sees everything in economic terms. Now, this is why I'm very clear in using the term Marx and not communism, because he sees it as periods and motivation for mankind as in economics, as the primary motivator. And it's basically it is, and I will admit to I haven't really read it either, but I know of it. But most everybody, and I've definitely read great chunks of it, I don't know if I've read complete, Adam Smith's Capitalism. I've read a bunch of that, but you really needs to start with his earlier book, Moral Sentiments, to really sort of get which is sort of gets into the freedom aspect, and that's going in there, that economics is an outshoot of that, but not at the core of that. But Marxism, this is why I know I've gone detoured a lot, but Marx sees everything as in economic terms. That has infiltrated all of academia, even conservative, market-based academia. Obviously there's outliers of a few professors and a few writers, but the great bulk, London School of Economics was founded as a socialist school. I had a professor who was educated, graduated from Oxford, but was an American who went to Oxford and who taught here in California. And there are sort of strains, and he was not a Marxist based, and he was, again, one of the outliers. So there are vague strains of this, and you can still see some of this in some of the professors, writers, like C.S. Lewis and why am I Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, they see things in a different viewpoint than the economics first. And so because of this economic focus, gets back to the story here, is that they see, the economic system of National Socialism and fascism are, I'll go nearly identical. I just don't want to say it because I know there are differences, but they're getting really down into the weeds, and I would have to sort of deeply bone up a little more deeply on my fascist ideology / practicality, because both National Socialism and fascism operated within the real world as opposed to the ideal world. Because you can look at, totalitarianism is a term that comes out of Mussolini. If he was not the actual one to start the term, he's definitely the one that popularized the term of totalitarianism, but he never achieved a totalitarian state. He wanted a totalitarian state, but there was still a king above him, and there was still a royal army, and there was still a royal navy, and there were still there was still the church that ran the school. So there was never a totalitarian state in Italy. He wanted. So there's the ideals of, if you will, of fascism, and fascism changes a bit over the time period of Mussolini, shall we say, including to the Italian Social Republic, the German puppet state at the end. So it changes over time. And so does National Socialism, both in, and I know this better in the National Socialist case, changes over time, both in theory, but also the theory is, who are you listening to? Are you listening to Goebbels, or are you listening to Himmler? And they could be saying different things at the same time, or Rosenberg, or whoever else. They can be saying different economic things at the same time, giving conflicting message. But they also dealt within the reality of the world of the big, like Krupp comes to power, or comes to mind as one of the major economic powers that definitely works within the National Socialist system as opposed to bucking it. But he definitely maintains his power, privilege, and ownership of his industrial empire, and not as a as either a state-owned enterprise or as a enterprise purely owned or benefited for its workers. It's still a, I don't know if a capitalist enterprise, but a capital enterprise. There's a difference. So reality and theory don't always match up, because reality is reality, and you have to deal with it. So that's why they always get lumped together, and everything. So, one of my sort of pet peeves is Hearts of Iron 4, and that they're fascism and National Socialism is put together. But what really the real thing is National Socialism. You could get rid of workers and socialism and just call it the National German Party, if you will. Now that only explains that they wanted, and to be really correct about it, they wanted national, meaning sort of unified, not having Germans in Austria and Germans in Czechoslovakia or wherever else, maybe Switzerland or whatever. National, and it's German, and it's a political party or movement, but it goes beyond just that. But those are accurate elements of the description of the party, and it goes to this whole worldview and ideology that it is anti-capitalist in the sense, and many anti-capitalists have never lived or experienced the capitalist state. They just never have. They have what has now sort of become called crony capitalism, or it's state capitalism. Like the current Pope comes out of Latin America, and Latin America has never, in its entire history, and maybe somebody can come in and prove me wrong on this. I'd love them to. And I know I have a few leftist viewers out there, can prove to me, and I would love to know, I would love to be wrong, that there was ever a Latin American capitalist country. There never was. There is this sort of state government, whatever you want to call it, business partnership with monopolies and state regulations and sort of national controls for local businesses. And so what you get is this sort of elitist intermixing of ancient, in Latin America's case often, ancient landowners mixing with business leaders, sometimes coming out of the ancient landowners, but other people that have moved into the elite, mixing with the government elite as a controlling thing, and it's often called capitalism, but it's never been a free market. It's never been, it is capitalistic, meaning those that have the means of owns either the means of production or the capital to gain the means of production sort of control it. So a lot of the people that have anti-capitalist feelings come out of this sort of rigged, non-free system, and since they've called themselves capitalist, and they are maybe capitalist in sort of the small sense that I have capital and I'm trying to build businesses, and that's what they're doing, but it's not with a free market Adam Smith capitalism where, oh, I did a shitty job, so my business is going to fail. No, they run to the government and say, oh, we need a tariff, I need a bailout, I need a this, I need a law, I need to whatever, save my business, or all these workers will go out of business or, lose their job. No, they're supposed to lose their job. Now, in a month, find a new job with a new company coming to replace it. That's the idea of capitalism, which was working in America. We've moved more and more away from it. Of a, so notice I said Latin America. United States is not Latin America. It may become that someday, but it's not there yet. So, so a lot of these anti-capitalists, including because Germany, particularly before reunification, was a lot of the people went to people who, or entities, shall we say, who had money to go, hey, I need to build a new steel mill. So they had a partnership with a government type, and often that was also landowner types and other things for investment. So it was not a free market situation. Now, it's not necessarily bad, and it's not necessarily wrong, or the worst way to do it is to try to move yourself from an agrarian, human, animal-powered society to an industrialized society, including industrialized farming. And by that I mean a tractor. And you no longer plow with a horse. You no longer have a wagon towed by a horse to get your products to market. You put it in the back of a truck. So a farmer has a tractor and a truck. And he doesn't use a windmill to pull his water out of the ground. He has a pump and electricity. So, and whether that is farming on a huge factory farm with lots of laborers, or whether it's a sort of family farm that maybe seasonally gets a bonus of laborers, so both things exist in America, a family farm or a huge industrialized farm, but they're both industrial in the sense that they use electricity, they pump water and use sprinklers in the more arid parts of America to water it. They're not, and they have tractors and they have trucks. They don't, they're no longer human power. Obviously they work hard and they break a sweat, and you got to hook machines up and take them apart and fix them and do all of that stuff, but it's industrialized farming. So to move from an agrarian society to an industrial society, both in manufacturing and farming and all of that, you can't always easily and efficiently do it in a capitalist system, in a free market system. You can do it in a free market system. It may be best to do it, but just social realities. Again, we can talk Adam Smith's moral sentiment and Adam Smith's capitalism as theories, but they need to exist within social realities. Okay, so society may not put up with the idea of, oh, hey, it's all free market. Well, so what if you're out of a job? You go find a new one. Go retrain. Go from being a farm laborer to being a factory laborer. Just, and oh, well, it's going to be 3 months without work. Well, yeah, you don't need food or home or whatever. No problem for 3 months while they're building the there's social realities. We don't want the people starving. And so change that happened in Britain over generations as industrialization came, and there were still, and we could talk about, I particularly know the Highlands and the Highland clearances, but there were, and in the migration of people from rather populated highlands to Glasgow, or being sent to North America or Australia to, depopulated, as it is still to this day, depopulated highlands with a highly populated Glasgow that used to be, and it started coming back a little bit, but an industrialized urban society, and that there was a lot of harsh elements, and this is before, in my opinion, society was capable of having a social welfare system to support and cushion the blows and the impacts of the change of it. But and so I know this, and I know it pretty well, what happened in Scotland, and by extension and some other stuff I've read, I know sort of what had happened in England. But that happened over generations, starting in the 18th century, moving through the 19th century into the 20th century. And so it didn't happen overnight like it happened in other parts of Europe. And so it was able to be more, not entirely, because it was more mercantile, which we could get into that, but we won't at the moment, and mercantile system as opposed to capitalistic, though there is capital elements in mercantile system. So, taking too long to get there, I'm sorry. I hope you guys will jump, if those are uninterested can jump ahead. And this is sort of why, just as a note, if I'm keeping something like this sitting up here, meaning nothing happens, you can sort of skip ahead through YouTube if you don't like my political talks and so they're not just political, they're sociological and whatever else. You can disagree with my conclusion, but I hope you understand my why I'm having this. And this is sort of, it's a long way to get there, but okay. So National Socialism needs to be seen not in an economic Marxist viewpoint. It needs to be seen in a cultural, social viewpoint, in which human lives have different values. And I am not talking about the elites have more value than the mass. Hitler, until he goes insane at the end. And he goes insane at the end. If there's any Hitler fanboys out there, and I've periodically confronted, I don't know if they were Nazis, but were sort of strong German nationalists. Just sort of want to excuse the past. And I can tell that there's a difference, but I don't know. But I have confronted a few on the channel, and a few that I do think are just strong German nationalists, and a few I think are maybe Hitler fanboys. But by the end, Hitler is insane, and it is a mixture of the stress of losing the war. It is a mixture of the medicines, or not just stuff he's being injected with, and other elements. Now, insane as in he doesn't recognize reality. Okay, Steiner, where are my division? Where's Steiner and my divisions? What's happened to them? He's no longer recognizing reality by the end. Now, you can classify his worldviews as mad in 1940, but he was not clinically insane as not recognizing reality. But so eventually he goes insane, and it's a progressive. As things get worse and worse, as he's getting weirder and weirder medicines, including, I guess some of the stuff would be like crystal meth of today, and maybe other concoction that he's given over time. And I don't know exactly what it was, and I don't know that anybody does know, because I don't know that, today, because I don't know that there's any good records of what the doctors that he trusted were injecting him with. And I think it changes over time, and so he goes insane. But Hitler, before he goes insane, values the masses. Not necessarily more than the elites, but highly values the masses. Okay? Much more so than somebody like Stalin, who doesn't care about the masses. His gulag system, and I've been talking to Mikhail online a bit, and he's been giving me stuff about some major canals that were linking up to Moscow and through the Volga Canal or whatever. I don't remember all the details, but I've been copying and pasting this stuff down for future Soviet events, that huge numbers of people died in building these canals, and they weren't necessarily, prisoners convicted of the crime of anti-Soviet behavior or something. These were people forced labor, and to do this, what are remarkable achievements, to get stuff done and to build major and useful building projects. But the callous nature and the way that he goes about the human lives tragedies to build these things are incredible. Okay, Hitler cared about the people. He would never do that kind of stuff, wait for it, to his people. Okay, this is the cue. It's not that he cares about all people in the world. He cares about his people, the German people, the National Socialist people. Now, if you reject that, especially if you, not just old-timey thought, because he talks, although his mother's dead, he talks about, well, his mother would never have given up her Christian faith. So he understands why these older Christians are around. They're going to be treated kindly and nicely and tolerated, but eventually they're going to die out, and we will have re-educated the youth. Reference to Al Gore and other modern global economic global environmentalists. They want me to and the other old people eventually to die off so that they've re-educated the youth. And although, I don't think they want us to go off in concentration camps, maybe if it was absolutely necessary, but they just hope we die off in time. Hitler, for his part, the good German folk, or Volk, with a V instead of an F, but that were the old traditional folk, he doesn't hate them or dislike them or want to punish them. He just, over time, like theoretically if his mother was still alive, to die out, of a natural, good, long life death, and the youth would be national socialized into his new viewpoint. So so even those that aren't fully on board with his National Socialism, he still looks at as his people. But if you have rejected all of that and gone to, say, communists or something, so you're German, but you're communist, you're no longer his people. And we can look at other categories. Some of them are, because this comes into it, sees things in racial terms. And I know I've had some discussions about, and I'll say this, I don't think Jews in Europe are a racial group. What? And you go, oh, but there's Jewish genetic markers. Okay. Now, I know Jews that I don't think have any Jewish genetic markers. They've been adopted and raised by Jews. They see themselves as Jews. They're, live their life as Jews. But a few genetic markers mean race? If you have the same genetic markers, there are people that look predominantly African and have very dark skin, but they have, in the same sort of genetic markers, Anglo-Saxon genetic markers. So if you're looking at them, a geneticist was looking at them for these markers for Anglo-Saxonism, they're Anglo-Saxons. Now in America, they'd be called African Americans because both of their parents, in American terms, are again, because these would be maybe African Englishmen or blacks or however they want to politically correct say it in Britain today. And I know there's distinction between West Africans, those that have been in Jamaica and moved to Britain, to those from Nigeria and moved to Britain or whatever. But so in America, you're sort of African American if you're even like one of your four grandparents was black at all to any degree. You're sort of considered African American. You're definitely like President Obama. Is he white or is he black? His mother was, and his mother and his grandparents who raised him were entirely white as white can be. It was only his father was Kenyan, and so very, very African. Okay, so is he African or is he white? So are you going to accept somebody who's half white as, oh, well, he's white? Now, so let's just, if we reverse the parentage, if his father was white and his mother was Kenyan, Is he going to be a white man? So if your father is German and your mother is Jewish, you're German? Or one of your four ancestors was Jewish and the other three were German? Are you the Jewish race? Well, this sort of gets down to is over the many, many generations of Jews living in Europe, they intermixed with the local population. Okay? They didn't just get lighter skin because they were living in a northern environment. Okay? It's because that they are intermixed with the environment over the generation, heavily or minorly, and they are, and because I say this over as a European viewpoint, is that the Jews are spread off, they're kicked out of Spain, a lot of them go to Italy, some of them go to Britain when they're kicked out, and the main reason they're kicked out is because they sort of have the anti-Muslim laws that everyone has to either become Christian or you gotta leave. A lot of Jews converted, some of them fake converted, so that's that, and the Muslims that fake converted gets you the Inquisition happening. So this is what I'm saying is Jews as a race, not as a genetic marker within their genetic makeup, but as a race, in my opinion, doesn't exist. It is an ethnic group. It is an identity. It is a viewpoint, a cultural viewpoint that may have ancestral links to the Middle East, and which, get ready for this, they are a Semitic people, okay? They are in the Semitic group of people, which includes Arabs, okay? That, the Semitic people, that is a, if you will, and again, would probably in 30 years or 100 years get better understanding, and what I'm saying will be thought, and I'm not talking about political correctness, I'm talking about a true understanding of genetics. I may be talking nonsense in 50 or 100 years because they'll understand this better, but my understanding of what makes up a race is a physical set of characteristics enough, and not just a few genetic markers, not just, they have a shape of a nose or something, but a genetic makeup. It's the Semitic peoples that inhabit this part of the world, and not just the Jews. It's the Semitic peoples. And so because of the diaspora, because of all of that, Jew is an identity, to me at least, not a race. I'm sure that there are Jews that will disagree with me and believe that they are a race. I'm sure that there are non-Jews that will disagree with me and believe that they're a race. I see Jews as a identity group people, and that may have, because I know those that are in the Jewish community that have been raised Jewish, practice Judaism, and from birth, that were adopted into Judaism and basically are known not to be genetically Jewish. So not all of these Jewish people, and do their grandchildren know, in cases, if you were adopted into a Jewish family here in America, and neither of your parents were Jewish, and then in America you're raised as a Jew, you marry a non-Jewish spouse, and then but you have children and you raise them as a Jew, but at some point, because in America we don't teach family history very well, their grandchildren have no Jewish blood, are now third generation Jews, believe that they're descended from people of Israel, and don't know that they're not genetically Jewish, or genetically Semitic, or whatever it is, because they've been adopted and they're at heart and soul Jewish. That's sort of my point. I know this being an American. I know of real world cases that go not to the extreme that there haven't been that many generations from going on, but so adoptees and other things. So Jewishness to me is an identity, not a race. But get back to this Hitler thing. Hitler sees this in racial terms as he understands them, and in my viewpoint is he understands it as a 19th century farmer understands animal husbandry genetics. Okay? That is how I think he and his Nazi clique understand race. So that's why they have all these skull measuring measurements and tools to try to see how Aryan or how Jewish your skull is, as opposed to a genetic marker, as opposed to your skin color or eye color or whatever it may be. So they're looking at skulls and skeletons to try to do genetic or racial, I should say, racial identification. And so this gets all into their viewpoint, and because that is sort of a farmers trying to breed better cows or chickens that are bigger, so that they produce more meat on them. That kind of, I'm going to have to label this as a sort of special talking episode. We're getting so long into it. I'm sorry. I will label this one as National Socialist Racial Viewpoints or something. Just thinking about that. Okay, so this is how Hitler is viewing race, is through a 19th century's farmers. And you got to understand, okay, another, since we're taking this, to me the 18th century starts in 1688, ends in 1788. Starts with the, because I'm an Anglo-centric historian, starts with the fall of King James II as losing his throne in Britain, and ends with the French Revolution basically in 1788/1789. So that's the 18th century. The 19th century starts basically 1789 and goes to, back up a little bit. The Napoleonic/French Revolutionary War period, to give it the sort of full name, but I sort of shortened the Napoleonic period. The Napoleonic period starts in 1789 and goes to 1815. It's a short, unique period in time. Is the Napoleonic period, because even though he was not, he was in on the early French Revolution to some degree, though not as a core fundamentalist, but he sort of rises through that. So sort of the Napoleonic period. The 19th century starts basically in 1815. It slightly overlaps with the what at least I call the Concert of Europe, trained with that term for it, in Vienna. Starts in 1815, ends, the 19th century ends in 1914 with the beginning of World War I. So Hitler, growing up, understanding the world, is in the 19th century entirely. Then you have beginning of the 20th century is in 1914, beginning of World War I, through to the fall of the Soviet Union. That's the 20th century. It's sort of the World War I and its effects. That's how I divide up the world in my time zone. So Hitler has a 19th century, and all of his cronies have a 19th century understanding of race. So, which like I say, we're going to call this a special episode. Just looking at the clock taking so long. And it gets to this French workers thing. And that's where this starts me out. He values, or different humans have different human value. Jews and other extreme degenerates, he wants to erase from the world. And he, in his viewpoint, sees particularly the Jewish as insidious, as infiltrators. There are lesser human beings out there. I'm just going to go with one that I think we would all agree that he would think is a lesser human being group, Africans. That they're somehow lesser human beings. But he has no desire, at least as I've ever heard, to want to kill off Africans. They're just some other people off in some other continent that Germany probably really shouldn't have too much to do with. Leave it to peoples like the British, but they should just be subject peoples out there that are inferior, way off somewhere else. So he really doesn't care or think much about Africans. They're not affecting his viewpoint, because they didn't affect his viewpoint in his life and in Germany's life as he understood it. If you remember, he's an Austrian without any colonies until he goes to war in World War I. I know he'd already been in Munich, but so he doesn't really think of the German colonies much. Even though I make a mod on the German colonies, he himself doesn't think of the German colonies much. So he values human life based on this hierarchy. So in France, you have French workers. There is the occupied and the unoccupied zone. Obviously, I think there will be firing an event that will get to get back the lost territories that were lost after World War I, that had been taken during the Franco-Prussian War, so that they sort of had, well, they had been French sometimes. They had sort of been independent states, sort of buffer states, if you go back, sort of this parts of the world here, but had been more French, then had been more German, and then back to French, and then Germany takes them back. But so who are they rightfully belongs to? Well, that's an argument of history. But so there's the occupied and the unoccupied zone. It is generally speaking understood. Again, we don't know what would have happened in the fullness of time of a German victory, especially if you look at Himmler viewpoint of pan-Europeanism, pan-Aryanism. Hitler wanted to see people like the Dutch people, the Danish people, the Scandinavians, if not on equal footing as true Germans, but just maybe one step below other sort of good European types, British, French, those types, maybe a step down from those Scandinavian types, but still up there. Sort of, if you're on this viewpoint, Italians, maybe on that same level, so you're still talking Western Europeans, still relatively advanced people, and that's sort of Himmler's pan-Europeanism. And eventually, I think Himmler, not necessarily Hitler, but Himmler saw it as maybe federal states, meaning that there's a central government and regional government, but eventually all sort of coming under one universal government. I don't know if Hitler saw that, but I also don't know that Hitler wouldn't have changed his mind with success. But as it stood, it was understood, and I don't know how much in writing, though, what does that really mean? But in this world that we're looking at this point, versus what was sort of understood, that at one point the great bulk of France would be reunified under a French government again. And although it may very much have demilitarized zones, very much may not be able to build new Maginot Line type fortifications, may very well be limited on the size of its army, whatever things that it may be, eventually it was going to come back as an independent state. That's how it was understood to be. Obviously and it starts out, the Vichy French basically, so to some degree, unlike what is sort of done in the movie Casablanca, more or less, the Vichy's it's an independent state. Not that they can do anything they want, but they're not told what to do by the Germans. As time goes on, eventually Germany obviously occupies Vichy. Basically, Pétain is definitely sidelined as any effective rulership, and it's Laval, the sort of vice president or vice premier. And then, although Pétain does face charges, I don't know that he's convicted of any major collaborationist charges. Laval is. He eventually becomes a diehard German collaborationist and continues to collaborate with. Just a second. Back. Laval is collaborating with German occupation, even of Vichy and beyond. Even once, in my opinion, it is clear that the Allies are going to win. I don't know all of his motivations. I don't know whether just he got sucked into it and didn't know a way out of it, and I don't know. But so the idea is that eventually France will be independent one day. Now, Germany puts on to various occupied nations labor requirements for labor to work in Germany. For the most part, in France, in France's case, the prisoners of war that they actively take during the invasion are not freed. Some of them are worked, but they're not freed, and they're not treated to the massive forced labor of like Polish and Soviet prisoners of war. This gets back to Hitler's view of people. But so they're not sort of, that group of people aren't really counted. So France needs to give labor to Germany and a quota level. And I don't know what it is right now. And Germany doesn't care how it shows up. And they would be as tickled pink if the labor quota is done entirely voluntary. And so a lot of it is in that there's recruiting posters. People, men and women, sign up to go to Germany to work in factories. They are paid to do so at the sort of going rate of a German factory worker doing whatever work that they're, qualified for, assigned to, whatever like that. They have passes, that say that they're French, but they get to live in Hamburg and they can't go beyond, they're restricted. They can't say go beyond 30 miles of Hamburg or Bremen or wherever it is that they may be working without permission. So they might get permission to go back to France for Christmas or visit a sick relative or whatever, but then that's only good for so long, and then they have to be back. So they can get permission to leave, but they got to get permission to leave, and they generally are, to one degree or another, quartered on the civil population, in that they, I don't know exactly how it goes, whether somebody goes, oh, you've got extra living space in your house, we're going to assign one foreign worker to live here, or if it's more of a, hey, sign up and we'll pay you, to rent a room out in your home to have a worker live here. I don't know the details, and I'm sure to some degree it changes over time, just because I see that in other elements of it. So these are mostly people, they're controlled in the idea of passes, but so are Germans to a surprising degree as things go on, and we can look at it, but other things. But so you're controlled as to where you go, but you work your shift after your shift in and around the town, city, whatever you're living in. You can go and do whatever you want to do. And I'm sure because you have a foreign accent, you're going to be stopped, and you're going to hand your pass over to the local policeman or SS guy or whoever it is, and they're going to check it out, or local SA guy or whatever, and they're going to check, oh yeah, okay, you match up, you're supposed to be here. Have a good day. And there's a lot of, and this also happens in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Belgium, in Western European countries. Now, if you do not make up your, more or less your work quota levels for your country, then Germany expects you to conscript local workers. However, lotteries or whatever, and now they're going to be treated the same. They're not jailed, they're not imprisoned, in the camp. They're just, they're expected to be brought to rail centers or whatever by the local French authorities, by whatever means, or Belgian or Dutch or whatever. If they're not voluntary, by whatever means, with their, suitcase and whatever, and they'll be given their passes and be taken, and then they'll be given permission to, be in Hamburg. And if they're not, and they're not at work, and then they're a fugitive kind of thing. So a lot of the French workers are sort of, if you will, maybe some of them are guests, some of them are enforced guest workers. That is how the great bulk of the French workers, as I understand it, and again, there's always people that are thought to be resistance fighters that are locked up and maybe sent to some work camp and whatever. There's also, shall we say, more war crime-ish acts. Conscripting labor isn't in and of itself, in my understanding, though I'm not an expert on the Geneva Conventions, isn't in and of itself a war crime. But some of the stuff is very much not conscripting. It is, like you say, induced, hey, good pay, good rations, come and work in a nice factory in Germany. Hope that factory isn't bombed, kind of thing. And there, if you don't work, if you're not productive in French society, you're not going to get a ration book or whatever else. That's part of the inducements is how France, I do believe, got some of their labor is, oh, you've got a job in your town, you're the baker, great, you can stay here. Oh, you've got a town, you fix the sewers, and you're one of the, local, whether, it's a local company or a local government employee that fixes sewers, great, you're in the town. Oh, Philippe, you have no job? You're 25 and you have no job, Philippe. Well, if you don't have a job in 10 days, we're going to conscript you for the German work quota because we haven't gotten enough volunteers. That's sort of my understanding is how it worked in France or in some of these other countries is that they tried to get those that didn't have any jobs because the depressed economy of the war going on, because a lot of businesses went out of business because they couldn't get materials. If you were a French shoemaker or shoe repair person or whatever, you might not be able to get enough leather to make shoes because you're not part of the boot making factory for the German army, if you will. There may be a cottage industry, but in France, you're not able to buy the leather. So your 4 employees, you may let them go. Now you may still, if you're the small shoemaker business, local thing, you may be able, cobbler, or whatever you want to call it, still may be able to repair local shoes because people's shoes are wearing out and have just enough leather to sort of keep yourself going. But your 3 or 4 extra employees, you can't employ them, so you have to lay them off, fire them, whatever you want to call it, because you can't, even though there's people wanting shoes, you just don't have the leather to make shoes because it's going to make belts and cartridge pouches, boots, and horse harnesses and whatever else for the German war effort, and this can also be for cloth, it's going to uniforms, not whatever. So a lot of businesses either completely shut down or reduced the amount of labor that they needed, so that there was a lot of unemployment. So these unemployed people were the people that were sort of swept up to go to the enforced labor. And then if they still weren't making enough quotas, then it goes to how important your job is. You need a town baker because you need the bread baked for the town. Great. But you don't need 10 sewer fixers for the town, so we're going to lay 5 of them off and send those 5 to go repair German bomb damage or whatever it might be. So that is how the great bulk of the labor worked for France going to Germany. There is another section of other forced labor, which this may also entail, is workers in France for Germany. Some of it very much was paid on the idea, hey, we're hiring to build submarine pins. I mean, they just may have said construction jobs, or batteries to shoot at the English across the channel, or West Wall, or whatever they're calling the jobs. Come and work in Le Havre or wherever, and work there. And so then you're not going to be called away to go work. This will be a protected job. You won't be forced out. They did that, as well as a certain level of conscription of local laborers. Hey, you're in this area, show up, you're going to be, fed a lunch or something like that, and you're going to work building the West Wall or whatever. So there was also that sort of conscription. Now, also going on for the West Wall stuff were Poles, Soviet citizens, Soviet prisoners of war that were basically in concentration camps, basically fed starvation food, meaning that they were slowly starving to death and barely had enough to eat. These weren't, and this gets back to values of humans. These people weren't so bad that they wanted to get rid of them all, in the sense that they wanted to get rid of all the Jews. So they didn't mind, because you can watch Schindler's List. I've watched it once. I don't need to watch it again. It's a very good movie on a very bad subject, so I recommend everybody to watch it, but it's not something like Kelly's Heroes that you want to watch every 2 or 3 years. Watch it, get it, good. And so the Jews were used as laborers in the war effort, but they were meant to die ultimately. And now, my opinion, from a practical standpoint, they treated him so badly that by the time a Jewish worker knew how to do his job, he died of starvation or brutality or whatever. So then you got another Jew to replace him, but he's now unskilled and he's got to get skilled up. So as an efficiency factor, it was very bad. But they were literally trying to work them to death. My understanding is a lot of the Soviet prisoners and a lot of the Eastern peoples, Poles particularly, but can be other Eastern peoples, they weren't actually trying to starve them to death in the war industries. But food was so short for Germany that the rations for a Frenchman would be less than it is for a German, so a Pole's rations would be less than a Frenchman. So it's not that they're actively trying to starve them out, but they are basically practical in the sense of the way of starving them because they do not have enough food to go around. So this is sort of, and so a lot of the workers in the East that are moved, and there's sort of a distinction there. Like if you worked in a Polish armaments factory and it kept going, I think you had a reasonable life within the Polish situation, if you will, which may not be a reasonable life to me in America, but within the situation of that. But if you were the various labor elements that were sort of scraped up, they rounded up labor, and if you didn't have I work at the Radom factory making pistols. Okay, yeah, go sir. Or probably not sir, but okay, yeah, you don't get taken up because you have paperwork that says that you work in in a protected arms industry. So that sort of forced labor that was moved to Germany and into parts of Western Europe, that was done, if you will, on concentration camp-like levels, in that you were kept behind barbed wire, you were guarded, often by the organization Todt, if it was a construction-type jobs, and they did move these peoples around at different times to build a factory. Okay, that factory's built, shift it somewhere, shift the labor pool to another location, maybe not all the way across Germany, but to a different town in a nearby area to build a different factory, or to repair a railway bridge that got blown up, or whatever it might be. But these people were kept under guard and were definitely in the slave labor. So this is sort of, again, back to Hitler. He cared about the masses. His masses he cared and valued. Other masses, England, France, he valued to a degree. And the system, both he and the system. I mean, they were authoritarian, so it wasn't that they were nice and kind and gentle, but these weren't, again, for the most part, the slave labor type situations. But once you start going more and more east, it becomes more and more the slave labor type situations. And the Baltic states were sort of more or less an island of well-treated peoples. These people, so long as they weren't thought to be enemies, pro-Soviets, the Jews that lived there, Russians, ethnic groups that had moved in or whatever, as long as you weren't thought as the enemy, generally you're sort of on their side and they treated you fairly well for the Baltic states. The Ukraine, who joyously welcomed in the Nazis, really ended up between being a rock and a hard place, partially because the Nazis were just taking the food out to the point, again, of causing starvation in the Ukraine. Of course, they had faced even a slightly more starvaceous period with the Soviets taking the food out before. So some of it was that, taking the food out, and the occupation policies. How do I put it? They didn't discriminate. It's sort of, the idea that, there was a partisan attack. Well, let's go kill the nearest 2 villages, presuming that the partisans are either from those villages or the villagers didn't turn them in before they, give a warning shout that there's going to be an attack. So there must be complicit. When maybe the villages were Ukrainians that were anti-Soviet, if not pro-German, but they're just treated because of whether it could be even a Russian Soviet partisan cell still operating in the wilds of the Ukraine, or whether it's a Ukrainian Soviet group or whatever it may be. And so they treated the what would have been otherwise a reasonably friendly population like they were treating other parts of the Russian population. So they really squeezed the Ukrainians between a rock and a hard place. They hated the Soviets and they came to hate the Germans. So there was almost no good guys, and so pick your side, either fight for the Germans or fight for the Soviets. You weren't going to get your choices. So Germany made some bad tactical mistakes, but again, it's sort of how they viewed the value of life, and that for the most part, Hitler wanted the Ukraine depopulated because he thought the Ukraine was going to become the German breadbasket, and the Germans were going to move in. They wanted to depopulate, but they still wanted sort of an underclass of Ukrainian laborers, and this was sort of going to be, this is more from Himmler at least, was going to be sort of the SS were going to be feudal lords over the local population, separated along racial lines and who's marrying who and whatever, but you don't want too many Ukrainian mouths, enough to run the farms and run the factories, but not too many over that, and you're going to constantly be adding more German people into it. That's how it was seen, and so this is sort of how you look at, or how I understand National Socialism. And National Socialism has to be seen, in my opinion, along these lines. It also comes along lines of anti-Christianism, whether that means neo-paganism, which I think mostly it does, but have to look at that sort of viewpoint as well into this mix and other things. And it's not just, oh, fascism and Nazism have the same economic system, so they're the same. No, they're fundamentally, in a non-economic sense, a different viewpoint. Now, they can coexist in, you can have the National Socialist German realm, and if you sort of the Hitler type viewpoint, Hitler is more, I think, more of a separatist than, say, a Himmler. Himmler, I think, like I was saying just a minute ago, wanted to have an SS overclass over the sort of Ukrainian peasants living out there. Where I think Hitler saw it more as clear the land to allow the good German folk farmers live out there. And so he sort of wanted to separate. And maybe as generations, the 1,000-year Reich, maybe as generations go on, they'll need more and more living room to displace more and more people, maybe. But for now, it was going to be that way. So, within that viewpoint, you can have an Italian empire. Because sure, they may either want to get all the German-speaking people out of this part of Italy, or they want to take that part of Italy over. But hey, you can have an Italian empire. It can be ethnically Italian, and oh, sure, you want to also rule Greeks. Okay, fine. You want to rule some Arabs. Fine, we don't really care. You can have your empire. We're not, and Hitler, at least at this time period, again, what does the generations and success go? You can have your entirely independent sphere of influence so long as you're not going to be invading Germany. Now, of course, we're going to maintain a super strong German army so that you're never, even if you thought you wanted to invade us, we're going to always be super militarized. So, have all of our wonder weapons and all of this stuff, so you won't be able to invade us, but you're going to have your fascist viewpoint, and the fascism never looked at race like Germany did. Not that there isn't racial and ethnic components, but it never was like National Socialism. So, and then the nationalism of Spain, there is an ethnicity thing there, but it's nothing like what you're seeing in Germany. And, Hitler, I don't think Hitler wanted Spain. Hitler, he didn't want Spain. He didn't care what the Spanish did. So long as the Spanish weren't part of a international coalition to destroy them, coalition of Bolshevism, if the Republicans had won, or a coalition of capitalists, the Allies, the Western powers, whatever, that wants to destroy them. So long as they're not part of that, Hitler doesn't care. So nationalist Spain, fascist Italy, fascist Romania. We got to negotiate where the borders of the Ukraine and Romanian peoples get to be, but after that, you can have fascist Romania. We're not, in the, Hitler's lifetime period, we're not going to bother with that, and so you can be fascist, or you can be monarchists, traditionalists, or whatever. We don't really care, so long as you're not an active anti-us. And so this is where you get the fascist National Socialist alliance, even though they are fundamentally different. And yes, you might bring up, well, Hitler was an admirer of Mussolini. And he had a bust of Mussolini, at least in some of his early offices, or a portrait. He was admiring, in my opinion, of the achievement of an outsider, because Mussolini, although not a Hitler born outside of Germany, but was not part of the ruling class of Italy, not part of the ruling elites, an outsider to that system, takes over Italy. He's admiring the triumph and the achievement. It's like admiring Alexander the Great, which I can't remember Hitler talking about him, but I'm absolutely sure he knew who he was, and he probably would have admired his conquest. Doesn't mean that he believed in anything, talked earlier about, of anything of the ideology and viewpoint of Hellenistic Greek culture and philosophy and thing. And I don't think he believed in any of it, in any viewpoints of that. But he could still admire Alexander the Great. Again, I don't have no recollection that I've ever read any comments that Hitler made. Maybe he didn't. I only got partway through Mein Kampf, admittedly. I did try to read it. I still have it on my bookshelf. It's rambling. It's not very well written. It's hard going, quite honestly. And even Hitler's, when yes, this is coming from Speer, when Speer said to Hitler, "Well, I'm still trying to get through," and this was after Hitler come to power, obviously, but at some point, still trying to get through Mein Kampf or something. And Hitler says, "Don't worry about that. It's out of date or irrelevant," or some sort of statement to that effect. Anyways, to what we're really going to do. So don't worry about it. So Mein Kampf might give you an insight into Hitler's general thinking, but doesn't, and does talk about National Socialism, but isn't the final word. It isn't the Bible on National Socialism in that sense. You have to add in writers that come along later, like Rosenberg and other thinkers that influence Hitler, to really sort of get this sort of racial identity, religious identity, that sort of race is religion, but it's also bound up in neo-paganism. But I don't know how much Hitler believed in the paganistic gods and how much Himmler believed in them, though I think Himmler believed in them more. But I don't really know, because Hitler does talk about some of that stuff, but I think if not believed in that they actually exist or existed, but believed that sort of in the idea of them, the spirit of them, of that, and they sort of are metaphors or symbols of this sort of neo-paganistic world that he wants to create. And so that, Thor or whatever doesn't really exist, and he doesn't talk about a lot of in that way. But you can look at the ring cycle, which again I fell asleep through trying to watch, because it was being sung in German, and it was a really good. This was many years ago. I didn't watch it on TV this long, and being sung in German because I wanted to understand Hitler, and it just had English subtitles, and I just felt, it was many hours watching it on television, a recording of it, and I fell asleep through it, and then I sort of figured out where I fell asleep and started again, and at another time, and then eventually fell asleep again. So I've never consciously been conscious through the whole ring cycle, though I think I've had it subconsciously through once or twice, but that's hearing it in German, and I even spoke less German than I understand now. And the subtitles were all so, but it's sort of the ideas of all of that to understand Hitler. And so again, these Wagner, Guido von List, and these other 19th century thinkers that give Hitler his foundation doesn't mean that he is slavishly copying either Guido von List or Wagner, but they're inspirational for him and this viewpoint. And so that's how you have to understand National Socialism. Okay, I think we're going to end this special episode here, and that's what this is going to be. It's going to be labeled as such. If you want to hear a rambling talk about my understanding, and I know I've done this before, of National Socialism and race and identities. So You can dislike this video if you want. Do appreciate it if you like the video. I'd like to hear your comments. I really do. One thing, and some recently, well, weeks ago now, but on the King's Crusade, some of my comments about the the game playing the Crusades against the Arabs, put some two people actually very quickly to each other, put some very negative comments about what I said on there, and I deleted both of. One was just sort of a short comment referring to the other one, so it made no sense without the other one. But because they used the four-letter word foul stuff that for the most part I don't want to use it on this channel, because they used that, I deleted it. Not if they had just been equally negative but without the bad language, I would have left it there and addressed them, give my viewpoint back to them and why I'm not the evil, terrible person that they were calling me. So if you want to disagree with me, I'm happy to have you do this, either on any one of my points or my overall viewpoint of how I understand Nazism. Maybe you think I've got it all wrong. That's fine, but please do so in a civil manner. And the other thing I really don't have much patience with are those who want to, and again, I'm not, very, very few people, and again, I'm picturing a few, and I'm not going to say any screen names here, but there are definitely, I would say, a few German nationalists, and those are, if you're just a German nationalist, I'm not anti you at all. But see, from comments, I don't know whether you're just a Jewish or a German nationalist, and so looking out for the German viewpoint, that you may be mistaken, and I may think you're mistaken in your views of history or whatever. But that, or whether you are a modern day Nazi who is not coming fully out, if you're sort of a person that wants to justify the Holocaust, wants to say, well, it wasn't so bad, or it was needed, or any of that BS, I have no time for you. I don't know if I would delete your comments or just go, I'm not going to engage with that. But if you want to talk about intelligent, rational discussion about historical figures and historical viewpoints, I'm very willing to have that discussion. And I like to learn about people's views. Again, if you have such, oh yes, we should kill millions of people just because, I don't see how I could usefully engage you. But if you want to talk about other things, I really would like to hear from you. So I know it's sort of a mixed message I'm giving there. But so thanks for watching. See you next time. We'll actually play some Hearts of Iron next time. Thanks so much.